think that, like, yeah, for sure, it's one of those things that none of us really saw coming to this extent. And I think, like, foolishly, I was one of the people who was just like, it's one of those things that'll never really get here, you know? Remember that time when there was that, like, theory that there's no corona in Africa? I was like, listen, please, the universe has spared us this one time. Because usually everything else, we're usually just there, number one. And then when it started coming closer and closer, and I remember the first case in Kenya was reported when I was in Addis. And a couple of hours, the first case was then reported in Addis. So my whole thing was like, I need to get home because I can't be from Giwadi here in Addis. Because wow, so then now what? And then I remember that trip back home was so strange because then everyone was so paranoid. The number of like checks at the airport were insane.
Wow.
And so it's quite scary because I feel like airports and planes were really the first site of this kind of like super paranoia. So yeah, so like coming back was really odd because then you're like, okay, wow, this thing is getting serious.
Okay.
And then like, yeah, so I had to quarantine and at the time it wasn't like government enforced, but it felt like the responsible thing to do. So then like staying home for those first like 10-14 days was very strange.
I don't remember any of this story.
Yeah, like also it's not like we're going to meet up or like, you know?
Yeah.
So I think like I made the decision to stay, like to put myself in quarantine.
Okay.
Even though it wasn't like necessary, but should everyone that I think that everyone should do. And that whole period and the period after that really fucked with my mind.
Yeah.
Because when those fununus for lockdown, I was like, excellent, I'm going to shoot every day. I'll do like one shoot a week. I shot one photo. I kid you not. Between March and September, I took one photo. One. And so that, I think that's when I was like, actually, there's a way that this thing is really taking a toll on like our minds. Because I think that the way that everyone approaches it is that like, okay, I'll be home and I can find all these ways to be productive. I can like shoot all these things. I can make all this music. But then there's all this panic and anxiety that you're really unable to be creative, to think through things. Yeah. And I think it took people a very long time to like settle.
In fact, in those first few months, there was this idea that okay, artists, entertainers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you guys, you don't, like you can create from anywhere, and so here's your chance.
Yeah.
Right? Which was odd because it didn't take into account the anxiety.
Yeah. And I think in the beginning the artists were very responsive. So there was all those Instagram lives, like a lot of DJs were doing things, a lot of musicians were doing things. And I think that we saw a lot of generosity from the artists until it got to a place where for the artist it was like, okay, so where's the money? Where's the revenue? Because there were so many gig cancellations. And I also felt like perhaps we also got to a place where the audience was expecting and not wondering how the artists are kind of like raising money to make all these things. And so there's a point there that it got quite, I don't say ugly, but yeah, it was a bit rough.
It was ugly. And that brings to mind this idea that there are some industries where value is not questioned, right? You don't go to a doctor and tell them, aki, you know? But there are some industries like the arts where it's like, but, you know, I want to look at your painting for free. I want to download your movie. I want to steal your music. And
I've been wondering what the long-term repercussion for that will be, because we also saw a lot of institutions also suddenly become so open. So like Vogue Italia opened the entire archive. Which usually I think is something like $350. And so I think there might be a thing where value is questioned even going forward. Because guys will be like, but
didn't you?
You know? And see you guys used to perform on Instagram for free, so like what's the... So I've been wondering about about that. And I guess in some ways it's allowed institutions to open up, because I don't think I ever would have thought that like all these big museums like the Moderna,
and like the National Theatres,
doing all these free things, being open and accessible in a way that they never have, which is terrible, because then it also makes you think about how some of these big institutions that have this kind of like massive collective ego, up until now, I think have been very invested in being inaccessible.
Yeah.
And it took them this and a very direct threat to their institution for them to be like, okay, let's...
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think that has resolved, honestly. Because definitely for things like theatre, it's not going to be resolved for a long, long time.
No.
And that question about value, it was a problem even before Corona. Because this idea that you can stream, you can buy a song for 99 cents.
Yeah.
Like, there's already a value question in culture.
Yeah.
And this isn't helping.
And actually another example of value is like, I feel like the arts is one of the few places where people feel like, and I guess, we can talk about it. We'll mention names. So Art Cafe had that whole thing where they were like, they told artists, design our new,
in exchange for visibility.
Coffee for, it was terrible.
Yeah.
And then they came back and they gave money. But I've been wondering about this thing that corporates do, where this competition obviously is a thing that allows them to have content, it's a marketing angle, but they get all this creative work and then they pick the best, which if you go to an agency, that's not how you do it. Like, you commit to an agency, you go to an agency because you're like, Jim, I've come to you because I like your work, let's develop. So I've been wondering about that whole process where you get everyone to send in things, then you pick the best.
And then everyone else was doing zero work.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm not sure, but there's something very rough there, and I'm still trying to I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But I'm like, hey, that's not something that should continue.
The other thought I've been having is that I don't think there's any other sector that lures people in using very false hopes. I meet young people who are like, I want to be a filmmaker because then I'll make a Marvel movie, and I'm like, there's like very many steps before that. You meet people who want to be celebs, people who want to be like, don't win an Oscar or a Grammy, and I'm like, there's no other industry that pretends that that's easy, that the pinnacle is easy to reach, like the arts. Like, if you think about the number of kids who are doing, like, they go to art school, they go to film school, and like, if you look at the percentage actually get into the industry, let alone the ones of those who actually succeed.
It's terrible.
And I wonder, because then I'm like, if you want to be a doctor and you go to a university, they're not going to cheat you and say, like, like the likelihood of you getting a job is reasonable. You know what I mean? So I've been wondering about that also. And on some level, people say that Kenya doesn't have like art education, blah, blah. And I feel like maybe that's maybe a good thing, because imagine the promise of arts in Kenya.
And there's been all these really terrible stories about these kind of like big art institutions. So like CSM, which is one of the leading fashion schools in the world, and where I believe McQueen studied. And so a lot of people go to CSM and the expectation is to leave as the new McQueen. But like,
how many McQueens are there?
And so now I think, was it last year I was reading about like the level of depression and even suicide at some of these big schools, because then somewhere along the way people realize that they're not going to be that.
They're not going to be the next
big
McQueen. And that the crazy thing about the arts also is that that the next McQueen can come from the street. Absolutely. They don't even have to have gone to school, right? So, I don't know. Wow. I'll look at.
Wow. I guess.
Next to the mic.
I guess.
Oh, that's a problem.
Even this kind of large, prestigious educational institutions that sell this promise, there's also a thing that they need, there's a kind of like reckoning they need to do, because the number of people who go to Berkeley with these high expectations, and
oh my God, Berkeley,
or Juilliard, or all of these schools that just promise you that you will be the next, knowing fully well that, you know,
might not.
So
I don't know, maybe then people start to investigate the value of an art education for life, not necessarily for succeeding, you know what I mean? Like, what does it mean to have studied painting and then go out into the world and get a real job? And I say that in quotes because a real job is a thing that's used as an attack often to people who work in creative sector. But it's a reality.
It is. And I guess maybe that's also where the continent, like, maybe has a bit of an opportunity, because it means that we can learn from the shenanigans and the mistakes, and rethink the structure, maybe.
I don't know about that, because I feel like what our societies have done is to decouple the arts from life, which was the thing that we were better at than, you know, than Europe or whatever, where art was not decorative, it was not separate from life. And once you separate art from life, it becomes an industry, it becomes a thing that people, because if you think about the number of Africans who watch African film, you know, and in Kenya is particular in this instance of like how many Kenyans engage with Kenyan art. And I find Kenya so mysterious. I know when we were last called peculiar, it became a whole problem. But I do think there's a psyche in this country that's really interesting to unpack. Maybe it's this idea that our nationalism is, we've not really put a pin on it. This question of identity being kind of ephemeral means that a lot of things can't work. If you have a society who are not agreed on what their identity is, then even things like social contracts, like how do we behave on the streets, becomes a problem. Because when you go to other societies where they've agreed that, okay, we are this thing, they're able to decide this is how we do things, or this is what we are famous for. This is what we are good at. This is what we are not good at. I feel like Kenya, like everything is up in the air. So like if you're a Kenyan and you want to become an ice skater, no one's gonna tell you, like, you are free, which is great sometimes. You're free to become whatever you want, but then on the other hand, it means that you're alone a lot of the time.
It's true. And because one of the things that, like, and I've been in many conversations that a version of this conversation has happened, but it's like one of the most glaring differences, like if you take Nigeria for instance and Kenya, is how, like, Nigerians are so proud to be Nigerian, and they're so proud of their Nigerianness and Nigerianism, and that whenever they find opportunity, they create space for other Nigerians. And so it's no wonder that, like, nowadays you look at, like, almost like the masthead of every kind of, like, major fashion magazine, actually any magazine, there's like at least 3 Nigerians in film, in music, and, like, they're everywhere. And there's always been this question about Kenyans, and, like, when Kenyans go, like, like why is it that it almost feels like people are very protective of space? And there's many theories.
What's your theory?
I think that this country has injured people so deeply and wounded people so deeply that sometimes when people find a way out, they take it, they take time to heal, and then they find a way to re-engage with the country. I think. Because there's also this thing that, because Kenyans are very entrepreneurial, you find Kenyans in the most, like, random places. and they go in and they work hard and they like form a little community that doesn't stand out too much.
Yeah.
It's a very Kenyan thing, like that thing for like you never, you just enter and you adapt and you exist quietly and you're friends with everyone around you. And so I think there's that perhaps.
I've been feeling like it could be that by the time you succeed, you did so much of that labor on your own in terms of like creating an aesthetic. I don't think people move up together.
No.
It's like everyone's a star on their own. And that means that then when you're told, when an opportunity is created, who are you going to bring?
Yeah.
Because you're bringing a whole other person who has a whole other world that they're building for themselves. And rarely do those worlds work together.
Yeah.
But then it makes me wonder then, how do we engage with the world as individuals, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because even if you look at our sports, we damage our artists we damage our athletes so much, right? Yeah. If you think about the Olympics and this idea that the artists can fund themselves into the Olympics, there's such a detached kind of engagement between our country and such things, you know?
Yeah.
There's some things that a country has to do for people. It can't be people doing it for themselves.
No.
You don't build cities, which is what's happening if you look at the design of our satellite towns. People are doing urban planning for themselves.
Oh yeah.
Right?
For sure.
You figure out sewage, you figure out water.
Yeah.
And then it becomes really messy.
And actually you figure it out for yourself.
Yes, for yourself. Or if you're lucky, with your neighborhood.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you have a society that has decoupled design from life. Because cities are things you design as people, not as you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
The other day I was reading about this town, I think in Italy, where they all like decide that this is the color that's gonna be. You know what I mean? You paint the whole Moroccan blue thing. I'm like, that's what you get when you have a society that is able to say, let's do this thing together.
Yeah.
So in this country, if you look around, you have the best and the worst, and everyone, like, we don't agree on an average. A basic standard of living, a basic aesthetic. So I don't know, man, about this country. And it's not getting better. It's getting more fractious and more.
But then I wonder, because East Africa, Kenya, we tend to get understandably salty because East Africa tends to get left out of a lot of narratives about the continent. When people talk about Africanness, what they mean actually is West African
or South African
or South African
or the essence, because sometimes it's essence of I'm starting to feel like yes, when you say Africa you mean West Africa if you're talking about people, but if you're talking about place, if you're talking about imagination, if you're talking about vibe, it's not people for Africa, it's animals.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? It's landscapes.
Which is funny because we have that.
Yeah, we do.
We have the animals, we have the landscape.
We do. But like when you think of Canada, you don't think of mountains, you know, you think of maple syrup and, you know, and Anglo-French problems. Yeah. But when in Africa, even when you Google Africa, like animals are competing with like people, right? So even that issue of like West Africa kind of foregrounding itself, that's when you're lucky, when you're being looked at as people. Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. And in Kenya, we are really bad at that because like we're like, okay, this identity thing, we can't do it. Yeah. So let's foreground the animals. Yeah. And I like when you visit our airport, I really get irritated when I see all these animals on the walls because I'm like, people live here.
Yeah, that's true. And that also one of the most bizarre things is that then if Kenya's tourism product, if Kenya's products that we sell to the rest of the world is animals, then I also feel like we're not doing a good job in protecting the animals.
Even at that, yeah.
So it's like interesting to see Rwanda, whose tourism product is quite young.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also one of the reasons that they're structuring it so differently, where they're prioritizing care for the animals.
Yeah.
Because that's precious.
And that's a national project, right?
Exactly.
Because if you think even about the conservation, which the government are also like, we don't want to do this work. So you get all these random foreigners coming in to do conservation on behalf of our country, which is sketchy as hell, because then their interests have nothing to do with the people.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And the people are then criminalized.
The enemy.
Yes.
Yeah. The locals are the enemies.
Yeah. I'm like, you don't conserve by keeping people away from things.
Yeah.
You have to create a relationship. And that relationship was there. Right?
Yeah,
because the only reason those animals are here is because there was some kind of relationship between the humans and the animals. So I don't know what happens when you have a country that is constructed in these little tiny entrepreneurial bits. And people are always saying like Kenya is amazing because of innovation, but there's a dark side to that. It's people are innovating because there's no fallback. There's no and I guess now if you look at what happens in politics, where it's like getting into politics then has nothing to do with, you're not carrying people.
No.
You're carrying yourself, your wife, your sister, your family, and then the cost of that.
In fact, you get into politics to build generational wealth.
Yes. And these days people are even doing like multi-generational wealth. Like they can, you're not generating wealth for many generations that are not even your, and the cost of that theft is crippling. And then you hear people say that our health sector is not funded by our taxes. Where is the sovereignty if you're not paying for the health of your people? How do Kenyans, like, I can't believe like being a president of a country where I can't afford to pay for the health of my people. Someone else is paying for the health of my people. Someone else is paying for the tourism. Someone else is, like, then what am I doing? Right? What does it mean to lead people if you can't? And if you look at it from like if you look at a family metaphor, then Kenya seems to be a home where the neighbors are paying for the school fees. The neighbors are paying for the medicine. So how does the dad and the mom, how do those kids hold their heads up high in public?
That then brings up another question, which again like has floated around the country for many, many years, which is that like what would take Kenya or Kenyans to like for there to be a revolution in this country? You know what I mean? Because I think that as much as Kenyans are very frustrated at their leadership, I think that we are also spoiled because in many senses we live in a place where not everything is functional, but there's certain things that are. And then we do that thing where we compare. So like you compare with another African country and you're like, hey, you know, actually we are not that bad. So
and it's terrible to hear Kenyans say that about what's going on in Nigeria now.
Yeah.
It's
so
like
then guys are just like, hey, but you know, like, we have police
Olympics.
brutality, but it's not like that.
Which is like, man, that's like conquered people logic.
We're conquered people. That's
because we are conquered people, right? And we don't talk about that often, but like there is a psyche that comes with being a conquered people, because your self-esteem definitely has been knocked. Your sense of the rightness of your being, of your existence is knocked because you are wrong, right? So this idea about revolution also, for me, revolution is a social contract. It's people agreeing that we don't like this and we have to do something about it. The problem with Kenya is that we are not able to have social contracts. You can have 1,000 people on the street fighting for a thing, and then another 3,000 at home saying, let them do that. Me, my job, I have a job. Right? I'm not going to sacrifice for that. And those 1,000, the next day, they'll say, why are we the only ones here? When they can see you at work, right? You can't change things as a people if you're not able to agree, even on the dissent.
And do you think that we collectively have done enough to understand the extent of damage done by the British on us as a people? Because that's the thing, And I'm like, I feel like I read a decent amount and I'm exposed a decent amount. But even for me to this day, there are things I still find out and I'm like, wait, what? I'm like, how sway?
Yeah.
And I've been wondering about that because I even in my own little like small ways, where it's like I do a little like thread on Instagram about like stones or like the history of like beadwork and things, like the number of people who don't know, don't know how they were erased, why they were erased, and that worries me because I'm like, then it means that at no point was like either like a collective unpacking or collective understanding.
Knowing is an economic activity, right? If you don't invest in knowing, then people won't know. There's a thing called a thing called Operation Legacy, which is a thing that the British colonies did, where they intentionally destroyed archives of colonial records, anything that would embarrass the empire or would cause problems. Like, I visited our museum the other day, and there's a section about the formation of Kenya, and that exhibit doesn't make sense. It is dissonant. It is like. And you know, the problem with our museum is that we are told that 90% of the audience, 96% of the audience is kids.
Oh, wow.
Right? And you go to the museum any day, you'll find like kids
buses
kind of being
hustled
through the exhibits. Move, stop making noise. And then, so I was in this section for the formation of Kenya, and like it's jarring because like there's such violence there. There's the clothes of people who are murdered, you know what I mean? Weapons. There's a painting of a massacre with like people, women, children, men who have been killed by white people. And then you have this caravan of kids being hustled through that room. Like go. Like move. And I'm like, but. And I remember watching, there's a kid who stood in front of that painting of this massacre, and the kid couldn't, because what is that drawing? It's like graphic as fuck. And the teacher is like, move.
Just keep it moving.
So I'm like,
keep it moving.
But what has happened to that kid? What? Yeah. And so, if our museum, which you would imagine is a place of knowing, a place of remembering, if the memory is faulty, if the knowing is not...
Also because who was in charge of the museums?
Exactly.
I'm like, please, friends.
And so no wonder people don't know, because we've invested in
not knowing.
And not knowing.
And that also, we also haven't had a moment to kind of like interrogate some of the people leading these structures, because I wonder who designed the first ever curriculums. I feel like there are many white people involved, many British white people involved.
Our anthem, those white people involved.
Yeah, because I'm like, there's no reason why children in a Kenyan primary school are being taught about the cows in Argentina. What are the names of those cows? But like, we all know them. We all know them.
Or about the temperate regions of Brazil. Like,
and there's the thing, like, why are we being taught that?
when we don't know so much about what is immediate to us?
People don't know about the gemstones that are mined in Kenya, but they know about the cows that are needed in Argentina. I'm like, please make it make sense, please. Please. And so it makes this thing that you're saying about the museums, I'm like, Leakey at the head of the museum, I'm like...
And we name a building after him in honor. And I'm like... so many objects left this country through Leakey.
Yeah.
And that is a crime to the issue of knowing. When you take objects away from people, you're making sure that the generation that follows will not know, right? Will not see, will never touch, will never know. So there's a thing we were talking about the other day about how Africans have never constructed their nations, right? Starting with the border. We didn't draw our borders, right? What would our nations look like if we drew them?
Yeah.
All these fucking tribalism issues is because we live in a nation, we are fenced by an idea.
Yeah.
If you look at the tribes, things like the Luya are a construct, a British construct.
They are a British construct,
right? And many other tribes are just kind of people who are like in the area, and the British come and say,
they're like,
guys, just average this shit out, you all live together, you are now the Mijikenda. Great. You know?
Yeah.
But then And then after a while, people start to fight about that.
Yeah.
People now will go to the streets and fight for blood because of Luya.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I was reading something about how, like, even Nigeria, the nation Nigeria, is a construct because there were two separate countries. Then the British came and said, "Hi, please." Yeah, as well.
And so, if that very, very act of the forming of a nation, we did not take part in it,
Yeah. Yeah.
how the fuck are we going to design a city? We don't have the discipline. We don't have this idea of sacrifice. We don't have it. Even like if you look at the Mau Mau, because I've been reading a lot about the Mau Mau, and like you know, in the Mau, like in school history is like maybe what 2 weeks you do history of Kenya Mau Mau. You speed across Mau Mau because also the teacher is like there's some sketchy stuff in there. Our president like was a collaborator, you know, all that stuff. You cannot just rush through it because it's like there's an exam thing, and you know the questions that will come. So fuck knowledge. Of course. Just let's speed through
cram
this.
the names, cram the dates. Yeah.
And there's this thing people say about the Mau Mau, how they killed more Kenyans than white people, and people say that that's people interrogate that as a failing. But when you read that story much deeper, you find that the people who are being killed were collaborators, right? And for me, I'm like, if you're a revolutionary, the idea of a collaborator is actually more insidious than the idea of the enemy, right? Because then the collaborator sits in this gray area where they're able to weaken you in such an insidious way. Me, let me tell you, if I was in a revolution, I would be all about killing collaborators because I'm like, they are worse.
Yeah, for sure.
In a sense. Yeah.
They're spies, they're like...
There's no loyalty there, there's no... So these stories we tell about ourselves, and then you go and build a statue for Dedan Kimathi and put a quote there that he didn't actually say. Inscribe it there in stone. like this country is such a fiction, right? And so when you ask people to fight for it, to bleed for it, how are people going to do that for a fiction? You know, at least America, for all their faults, they have a story. It's like Harry Potter. It's like, this is our story and we are dying for it. But like, they invest
heavily
so in its memory.
Yeah,
in its, you know, How many movies do they make every year about America?
So great. You know, every time all those like the world is ending movies, it's always New York. I'm like, please, no. New York is what is underwater. It is not the world.
And even there are fly pods, because you know if there was an earthquake in New York, there should be rats running out of the You know what I mean? Like no one ever makes a film about that shit. But then, so they make this movie, it's the skyscrapers are just falling.
They're falling.
I'm like, sis.
I'm like, no. Manhattan is flooding, so therefore the world is ending. And you're like, hey, friend. Like,
that's another thing I've actually been thinking about. Like, how does culture fill in these gaps of metaphor?
Yes.
Because like if you're an American growing up, you've seen bravery.
Oh yeah.
You've not seen it on the streets. On the streets you're a coward.
Oh no,
right?
Yeah.
But in movies you see it all the time.
All this Jason Statham.
Exactly. You just see Americans, sacrifice, courage. Where do we see that here? In Kenya we have soaps. We make soaps which are pretty much about betrayal, lust.
Yeah.
It's like Kenyans have a very healthy sense of what it means to be cheating, what it means to be heartbroken, but we don't see ourselves being brave. We don't see ourselves sacrificing.
That's true.
And so, like this thing where like people say Hollywood is amazing, and I'm like, that's great, but what are you teaching your people? You're teaching your people
because cultural work is education.
Yes.
Because I'm like, I have such like vivid memories. By the time I was like 11, I knew that the day I go to New York, I want to go to Starbucks and order an Americano. Please, I don't think I was drinking coffee at that time. I had no business
desiring that.
But like I'd watched so much Sex and the City that I was like, Starbucks is the thing that I need most in my life, you know? And that just goes to show you this kind of like power of American propaganda.
Yeah. Listen, if aliens actually came to Earth, Americans would know what to do. They've run through that scenario so many times in their fiction, and that's how you build. If you bring Kenyans here and show them like a line of soldiers on the hill, you know, like that stuff that you see in all these medieval movies. What would Kenyans do? We've never seen ourselves in battle.
Yeah. And that's really the stuff that Gava should be investing in.
Yeah.
It is kind of like cultural power.
Yeah.
Of like, even if Kenya is fractured and we have our issues, you just tell Kenyans, you are great.
You're great. Here's an example. Look, here's a Kenyan who sacrificed. You know, because then they don't get to see courage on the streets. That's not a thing that you see in your day-to-day life. But in the movies, in music, in comics, that's how you build those kind of abstract values.
Hey.
But here we are. So in terms of like hoping and future, we are not investing in the future.
It's true, and I'm like, it's easy to then be like, Haki Gava should really just, the thing that we like to do and say, na serikali isaidie.
Yeah.
And like, for sure, Gava has a role to play.
Yeah.
A big role to play. But I also feel like Kenyan corporates have been extremely lazy. Because when you look at, and I'll give you the example of SA, right? There's a thing that's happening in SA that's so interesting, where like the corporate world and private sector, the way that they're engaging with the cultural sector, is so interesting. So like Coke will go to Laduma and be like, hi, like let's work together, you do branding for, or like actually, let's say Magnum, because I think he did a special edition of like the packaging for Magnum.
Chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just really beautiful.
Sure.
And you see also there's something interesting, because like one, you're highlighting this story of this South African designer who is making it, and that you're seeing a big company like Magnum paying him to...
You know, the troubling thing about that is that a lot of people say that the reason South Africa has a different attitude to culture is because...
Listen, I'm so tired. I'm so tired of you.
Yeah, is that, because it's a nation that is also constructed with whiteness. And that if that wasn't the case, then... I'm sorry. Then, and that's the thing that I think we have to grapple with.
But you see the thing that like, and I can see that and where that's coming from, but I'm like, that same company has an office in SA and an office here. I'm like, please, can you not see what your friends are doing?
Exactly, because here it is staffed by Kenyans, right?
Okay, please, no, you're just killing me.
And people do this all the time, where they're like, but Nike came to Kenya, but in Kenya they're doing boring things. Google came to Kenya, but in Kenya they're doing boring things. It's because...
Actually, we hear that a lot.
Yeah. It's because it's not brands that are interesting. It's the people who power brands, who decide that this brand is going to do interesting things, right? Google Kenya, you can come here and just be like, me, I've got my job at Google. My email address is nani@google.com. Listen, my life is complete. Innovations, because like I have questions. Google Maps.
Yeah.
Google Maps, they've just taken the technology from Google wherever.
Yeah.
But like Kenya has special needs. Like telling Kenyan that go to point A to point B is a straight line, you're not accounting for the fact that over here, there's another pothole, where your car will disappear. Like, no one at Google Kenya is like thinking about, okay, how do we make this app also say that there's another factor here about the condition of the road.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or that Uhuru Highway, for instance. Because Uhuru Highway, Google Maps does not understand Uhuru Highway. It's like... There's congestion here, 5 minutes. But it doesn't know that the congestion is cops who are on their phone like this. There's no algorithm that's going to account for how many minutes this guy will take before he says, guys, move.
Yeah. And that actually with all this construction, because even, when was it? I think on like Saturday. I can't remember where I was going. So me and the cab driver were just going, the road was demolished. We get there, the map is like, go straight, we're like, friend. There's no road.
That roundabout that's at the mall, which was blocked by what's that governor called? Kidero. He came and put stone there. Google Maps doesn't know, because it's like how do you explain that? So it keeps telling you come
Just
back,
sit.
and like Kenyans
Take
come
the
and they're
third
like
exit.
there's blocks of concrete there. So I'm like, if you're in Google Kenya, like that's your job, right? You know what I mean? Take
Yeah.
this global brand and then say this has to work for my people.
Yeah.
Not happening. That's this thing of like brands being staffed by people
Yeah.
who have to choose to be innovative. It's not just, you don't just import innovation.
Okay, Jim, we can't end on this note. It's so fucking bleak.
And I don't know.
But I think that it's been interesting seeing and hearing people who, I guess, are able to see the shenanigans and are starting to call it out. So like there's that whole series of MDQ that we all like,
Yeah.
where she talks about many things,
Many
all
things.
of which are true.
Yeah.
And I think that we need, like, obviously, people who are saying such things to be given much bigger platforms. I'm like, put her on KBC, put that whole series on KBC, Nation, everywhere. But then also for more people, because then if not, then
Yeah. Design. For me, design is it's part imagination, it's part science, it's part, and I think because of our British colonial religious, hyper-religious attitudes to the question of imagination, that's why you have a kid drawing a scorpion in primary school is called a devil worshipper.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It then means that you can't design a future without designers.
Yeah.
You can't design future without imagination.
Yeah.
I don't know who we want to design our future for us.
You know,
Vision
you said
2030.
You said that scorpion thing and I remembered, and this is a whole sidebar, Akipole. But when I was in Saints, there was a teacher who used to tell the girls in IB, that they can't wear, that they can only wear studs if they wear like anything more like flashy, anything more visible, that it will really just distract the boys. Like their hormones will be all over the place. And like everyone used to be like earrings. Earrings.
Yeah.
Like anyway, that was a whole
Like who designed that thought? You know what I mean?
I think her by herself and her church. Like
Because like I remember growing up like in the 90s there was this panic about lollipops and drugs.
yes. Hey, that they used to have drugs. No one ever said which drugs.
You know exactly. And like when I read about that one now as an adult, I found that was not even a story from Kenya.
Really?
It's a story like that was flying around in the States and then it came to Kenya. It just came. No one dressed it up. No one checked it for facts. People just brought it into the country and said, now
like
lollipops.
a WhatsApp forward.
Yeah. So I'm like, man, like in terms of our borders around thought, there's no visa required for a thought. It just comes straight into State House. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then it becomes public policy.
Yeah.
Without people really, man. So I'm not sure how to not be bleak about this, because even those things that people are doing where artists or where people are carving for themselves a piece of Kenya and saying, in this piece of Kenya, we're going to work differently. We're going to treat women with respect.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those are pockets. That's not how you change a nation, because you can have your feminist paradise here, and then next to it you have such trash happening that they almost cancel one another out.
Yeah.
Because I firmly believe in this thing of like energies cancelling one another out. You can have such darkness happening there that all this light you're creating here, you guys are just average.
And this thing that you said about like things just entering visa free to State House to wherever, also makes me think about like the people like Ezekiel who exist and continue to exist unchallenged. Like they're challenged by like 4 people, you know?
Yeah.
And everyone else is like, it's fine, like for the children, for the generations. But it's like, no, like, and it's always been that thing that you've said about like the ability for adults to choose for themselves.
To be adults.
Yeah.
Which again is also very colonial, because of this idea of like the African as this childlike person who has to be governed to be civilized, right?
Yeah.
Our penal code was laws to govern children. Don't stand there. Don't sit there. Don't, you know? You create a new country and you just carry those laws forward. George is always talking about this, about how even our infrastructure is designed to penalize people, right?
Yeah.
City council, when they build barriers, they make sure that if you hit them, you will die. You know what I mean? It's not a deterrent. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, that's how you design for people who are not supposed to sit somewhere, not supposed to stand anywhere. You can see a city that has been designed to penalize its citizens.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
a lot of our laws, a lot of our policies, a lot of our state, the way that
Our
state
lack
looks
of
at,
sidewalks.
yeah,
Like
people have to be killed
pedestrians.
on the streets for bike lanes to be an issue.
Yeah.
So I feel like we live in a country where the state is surprised by people. It's surprised by their ambition. It's surprised that they want more. It's surprised that they want better.
Yeah.
It's almost irritated by them wanting better.
Actually,
Because
yeah,
like,
that's
guys, can you just... Why do you want better healthcare? Who's gonna pay for that shit?
Yeah.
Not us. We have plans for your taxes.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
remember, was it? I think it was Maureen who was telling me how that when all this corona stuff was happening and people were talking about reopening schools, that one of the main reasons that the Ministry of Education was just like, listen, schools are not opening. They're opening in 2021, is because at the point at which primary education was made free, they didn't increase the capacity. So suddenly, you had classes that used to hold 15 people that are now holding 40 students.
Yeah.
But like, there's not like the class size hasn't been changed. They haven't added classrooms.
Yeah.
And so
Same salary for teachers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there are many schools who are like, listen, we have 50 kids per class. There's nowhere else. Like, so we can't.
Yeah.
Like, and like, I was just like, actually, yeah, it's true. The government made this announcement, I don't know how many years ago, because that was back.
Yeah.
Free primary education. But then they made the announcement and they were like, okay,
Pax.
see you. And no one followed up to be like, okay,
Yeah.
how do we then increase the capacity for these schools to be able
Do we
to
pay teachers more?
accommodate?
Because now
Exactly.
they're teaching
50
factor of 3 times
Yeah.
more. They're marking 3 times more papers. Less attention for all the kids. I don't know. I feel like
And this goes back to the thing that you were saying that I cut you off about design and designers going forward.
Yeah. Okay, but if we are determined to end this thing on a positive note, let's find one. Let's find a positive. I think we can find one. I think it's great that we're still here. Against all odds.
Listen, the humor for 2020 is too dark.
We are still here. In Vizuri or Corona, it didn't finish us, because let me tell you, if Corona had decided that Africans are going to be susceptible to it.
Listen.
I was talking to my mom yesterday and she was telling me this thing, if it was if Corona needed us to be on our best behavior, to wear masks properly, to wash our hands, this country would be empty.
Listen.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I think the British would be coming back and saying, Hodi.
It's so bad.
It would just be empty. It would be Bill and Melinda Gates would be sweeping bodies on the streets and saying, we told you. So that's a positive. Positive note. I did it.
Oh God. I mean,
Thanks.
and cut. You're so stupid.